This is a 90-degree right angle triangle. Why this triangle is called right angle triangle? Because it has a box and the box represents 90 degrees. We all know that any triangle, the three angles in a triangle adds up to 90 degrees. So therefore now, those two angles, let's call it alpha, and let's call the other triangle, the other angle theta, they are both acute angles. Acute. They are both acute angles, meaning that they are less than 90 degrees. So let's call this one alpha, and let's call this one, for example, let's call this one alpha, and let's call this one theta. So it would be a good idea to draw a copy of this right angle triangle by itself on a blank sheet of paper. The 90 degrees represents, the box represents the 90 degrees, and these two angles, alpha and theta, they are the two acute angles. They must add up to 90 degrees because in any triangle, the three angles must add up to 180. If this angle is already 90 degrees, alpha, both alpha and theta must be less than 90 degrees. They must be both acute and they must add up to 90 degrees. So 90 plus the 90 will give us 180 degrees. So please take note of this. Now, the side that is opposite or the side that is away from the 90 degrees, or you can say the box of the 90 degrees pointing towards the hypotenuse. So the side that is always away from the box is always the hypotenuse. So you can label this side the hypotenuse. The box is always pointing to it. Right. Now let's talk about this side there, that vertical side. This side, you can label that side two different ways. It depends on the direction of the acute angle that you are dealing with. So if you are referring to an alpha, which looks like the A, this side is next to alpha. Adjacent means next to. So you can say adjacent to alpha, or you can say next to alpha. Right. The list of formulas will use the word adjacent, because adjacent means next to. As you can see, alpha is very next to that line, that side. It actually touches it, isn't that so? If you bring alpha a little closer, isn't it touching it? It is next to it. This side is adjacent to alpha. So you can label this side adjacent to alpha. Adjacent means next to. So the reason why this side is called adjacent to alpha, because it is next to it, to the alpha we're talking about. Right, exactly. Adjacent means next to. So just to reiterate, this side is called adjacent to alpha because it is next to alpha. However, you can also call this side opposite, but opposite to theta. Because as you can see, it is away from theta. So this very same side can be called opposite theta, because it is away from theta. So that very same side, label it opposite theta, or you can also label it away from theta. So the word opposite and adjacent, it depends on which angle, acute angle you are referring to. So this very same side can be called adjacent to alpha, or it can also be called opposite to theta, because as you can see, it is away from theta, isn't that so? So also label it opposite to theta, because look at right where theta is. So it is away from theta. So in a nutshell, this vertical side is, its name is directional. It depends on the acute angle that you are dealing with. If you are dealing with alpha, then you have to say adjacent to alpha because it is next to it. If you are dealing with theta, then you have to say opposite to theta because it is away from it. A similar situation with this horizontal side. So therefore now, this horizontal side, one of its name can be adjacent to theta because it is next to theta. Actually, theta is resting upon it. So it is adjacent to theta. So you can also call this very same side opposite to alpha because it is away from alpha. Opposite to alpha. I have to say it is directional. Therefore, look at what is possible now. So I'm going to pause. So therefore, in the event we have a right angle triangle, and let's rotate it. Let's rotate it anyhow. This side here, what can we call this side here? This side here, what is the name of that side? This is the hypotenuse because it is away from the 90 degrees. So we can clearly call this side hypotenuse. The hypotenuse right here. What about this side here now? This side here, that side here. There are two names we can call it. Choose a name to call this side. So bearing in mind, the word adjacent by itself means next to. The word opposite by itself means away from. How can we label that side? Taking into consideration theta and alpha. So therefore, because this side is next to theta, you can call it adjacent to theta. Because it is next to theta. What about this side? Choose a name to call this side here, that side here. So therefore now this side, because it is away from theta, you can call it opposite to theta. Because it is away from theta. Opposite means away from. So this side can be called opposite to theta. Away from theta. Now let's go back to that very same side now. Apart from calling that side adjacent to theta, how else can we call that side? That side we say adjacent to theta. What is another name to call it? So therefore now, that very same side can be called opposite to alpha because it is away from alpha. So you can call this side, that very same side, opposite to alpha. The name of that side depends on the angle that you're referring to because it's directional. So you can call this side opposite to alpha. Once it's away, you can say opposite to the angle, which is alpha in that case. So in conclusion, what about this side? There's another name to call that side, and you have to use the word adjacent. Adjacent to which angle? So because this side is next to alpha, that side there is adjacent to alpha. So you can call this side adjacent to alpha also. You can also call this side adjacent to alpha. So therefore, this side can also be called adjacent to alpha because it is next to it. So therefore now, no matter how the triangle is twisted, the hypotenuse is always away from the 90 degrees, and the two other angles that make up the 90 degrees, their names, their labeling depend on which acute angle that you are dealing with. Just remember, adjacent means next to. So once the angle is next to the side, you say adjacent to that angle. And opposite means away from. If you are referring to an angle that is away from that side, you say opposite to that angle.